Hello, my friends. I am smiling so big because I have been waiting to get this conversation out to you. Joanne is a mom of two. Her boys are both older, Benjamin and Sebastian. Benjamin was born with lisencephaly, and her younger son, Sebastian, has autism. And when you want to talk about a mom who fights and advocates and figures things out in the way that works best for her so that she can be the best medical parent possible and just parent possible, that is everything Joanne has done. She's an author. She's written a book called Fallen Recovery. She has fought to find the right doctor and team for her kids. Her son, who has an intellectual disability in college, is a college athlete. I mean, it is just amazing. I'm not going to talk anymore so we can quickly get to my conversation with Joanne. Thank you so much for joining us today. Introduce yourself. Tell us a little bit about you, your family, where you come from, and just about you.
So, my name is Joanne De Simone, and I live in New Jersey with my husband and two sons who are now 25 and 21. Before children, I was a professional modern dancer, and then I shifted and went into special education. So, I was a special education teacher, and then I had two sons who have disabilities. Currently, I work as a special education parent advocate. And yeah, I think all through my journey, the closer I got to working with parents, the more I felt that was really my calling. I mean, I
Mm,
love working with the kids, but I love training parents and helping them on their journey.
yeah.
So, yeah, my kids really afforded me the opportunity to do that. My older son, Benjamin, was born with a rare brain malformation called lisencephaly. So he has cerebral palsy that involves all his limbs. He's completely dependent for all activities of daily living. He's nonverbal. He now has a feeding tube. He has seizures still daily because he has this other rare condition called Lennox-Gastaut syndrome, which is a form of epilepsy that's very difficult to control. And he has many different types of seizures. And my younger son is on the autism spectrum. And I don't like to use these sort of terms high and low functioning because what
Yeah.
does that really mean? I think,
Subjective. Yeah.
yeah. And everyone's, there are different types of skills and abilities. And so
Mm,
lots of kids have strengths in one area and, challenges in others. And then it's completely different for another kid. So, but
right.
he's currently in an inclusive college program out of state. So he lives in a dorm and he's getting some credits, but it's not a degree program. So it's a non-degree program, but it allows him to take general education classes and get support and really just widen, his experiences. And he's a runner. So we were able to petition the NCAA along with his school. And he is a collegiate athlete, the first one in his school for sure. But after we got his waiver, the NCAA made it very clear that any child with an intellectual disability that is in one of these types of college programs and can actually compete may compete even though they're not getting a degree in division 3 schools.
That is absolutely incredible and paving the way for being an example for so many other families who were told this will never happen. I can't envision my future to have my child as an Olympic athlete. And what kind of joy does it bring you to watch him compete?
How do you even, it's
Yeah.
so in awe of him because I can't
Mm,
imagine doing
yeah.
it. I think it's lovely, when you get that experience where you watch your kids do something that you can't fathom being able to do yourselves. And I think
Yeah.
there are, a lot of situations where families don't necessarily get that experience or they assume
Mm,
they won't. And so this was completely his doing. In middle
mhm.
school, he decided he wanted to make friends outside of his self-contained classroom. And,
Yeah.
we just followed his lead. We encouraged him. He wasn't a very good athlete at that time. He couldn't run 2 miles, there were lots of times he had to skip, to get through a meet, but that was okay, and he loved it, though. He
Yeah.
loved, the parents on the sidelines cheering him on and
Sure.
just making friends with other kids, and he really worked hard consistently and got to high school and continued to work and work and work, and, I think that he was a great example, one for other kids in his high school who had IEPs and, didn't really imagine doing something like that. And we were fortunate to have a school and coaches whose basic attitude was everyone is welcome.
Yeah.
So, you know, I know other parents had reached out to me and said, like, oh, we're so glad our kids are really looking up, to Sebastian. And it was phenomenal. And, he made a goal. He knew it was going to be hard, made a goal to make it to varsity, which he did by senior year.
Wow.
And, I loved watching the other kids sort of like take notice and say, okay, yeah, doesn't matter what class he's in, right?
Right.
He's putting
Yeah.
in the work and he's getting it done.
I mean,
And
and just the mental fortitude and strength of runners is something
so,
I've always just admired. I love exercise. My mom has always run, and when
mm,
I do it, it's hard as heck, the mental game of it. So,
oh,
I
yes, it's
just
all mental. Long
yeah.
distance cross country runners, it's like 90% mental because their
Oh,
bodies are trained. But
yeah.
yeah, it's all in the head. So
Mm,
he's strong for sure in
yeah.
many, many ways. So
Yes. Well, I'd love to just learn a little bit about your journey and where you are at. I don't love the word journey, but we'll talk about the path that you have your life has taken as the parent of two wonderful boys with smiles that you shared a picture of. And I was like, oh my God, this family selfie is just like so wonderful. Take us a little bit back to the beginning when you were pregnant, finding out that something was going on and what that was like for you during that time.
sure. So my pregnancy with Benjamin was fairly normal. I had high blood pressure at the end, so I was on bed rest. I had had a miscarriage prior to Benjamin. So, I was definitely nervous,
Yeah.
but, you know, they induced me on his due date and all seemed completely fine.
Yeah.
And he was a good baby, first week, I say first week, it was like bliss, he only cried when he, wanted to eat. He was just a fantastic baby. And then we took him for his 1 week checkup. And the pediatrician, did the standard, put the measuring tape around his head, and he said, his head size is a little small. And then he looked at me and he said, but your head size is a little small. So maybe it's
I
really
love when they do that, right? They're like looking at the baby, and then they were like, "No, you're short."
right, right, right. So, I was dressing Benjamin, and my husband and the doctor went over to the consultation room. And the doctor said to my husband, I hope I didn't insult your wife with that comment about her head size. And he was like, no, no, no. And it was true. I wasn't insulted, but I was terrified because I could feel in my body
Mhm.
this was the start of something that I was not planning on. I just knew instinctually that this was not going to be the journey that I was expecting.
Yeah.
So we were very guarded. When we went back, I think he was 2 months old. The doctor said, yeah, you know what? Why don't you get a neuro baseline visit in? And that went okay. He was still doing all the things a 2-month old are supposed to do. But because I had been in special education and I'd worked with kids since I was 12, all my spidey senses were
Yeah.
firing. So by 3 months, I could tell he wasn't making any gains. Nothing had changed. And so I was getting more and more worried. And when he was 4 months old, we went to our first neurology appointment. And I'm sorry, the second appointment was when he was 4 months old. So 2 months, fine. 4 months, we went in. And then she was like, yeah, okay, let's get some testing done. We'll do blood work, we'll do an EEG, we'll get an MRI. And the MRI experience just didn't go down well. We could not, we got to the hospital and the orders weren't in. And so, we were waiting for the orders. I mean, he's 4 months old, and I had to, couldn't feed him because he
Yeah.
was going to be sedated.
Right.
So he was miserable. And then once they got the orders, they couldn't get a line in because he was so dehydrated.
Right.
So that was
The
just
perfect
a
storm.
torturous experience. Yeah, exactly. So
Gosh.
they said, "You know what? We'll try." So we tried to get an MRI with him in natural sleep. I'd nurse him, he'd fall asleep, he'd go in the machine, it would wake him up.
Of course.
We'd start again. We did the process like 3 times, and finally the tech said, "Let's just get a CT scan. It'll give you enough information for now." So we did that, got it on the first shot, and I don't know how long it took to get any results, but I know that the results came in the form of a message on our answering machine on a Friday afternoon. And the
Oof.
neurologist said, "There are many abnormalities on the CAT scan, including enlarged ventricles and pachygyria." And I was like, what does any of this mean? So we played a lot of phone tag. She was getting annoyed every time we missed each other. It was not a good
Oh,
scenario, and so for 2 weeks, my husband and I were just calling her and saying, "Listen, listen, the glass is already half empty. Please explain to us, what does this mean?" And she would, say things that made no sense to us. I think at one point she had said, "The brain is like a cake. It might look good on the outside, but how does it really taste? You don't know until you cut it open and taste it." And I was, what
oh
does that mean?
gosh.
What are you talking about? And, she's like, "Oh, Benjamin is Benjamin. Just love him. We'll talk about this when you come in." And I'm like, No, like, what does it
Yeah.
mean? Honestly, I think she didn't know because lisencephaly was rare. I'm not sure she'd ever seen it before.
Ah,
So either she didn't want to have the conversation or she didn't know how to have the conversation. But, after one last phone call where she said to me, "I've spent an exorbitant amount of time with you on this," I just hung up the phone and said, "Well, we're done. I'm not calling you again." Collected all of his reports, went to, our pediatrician, and he took a look at it and he was like, "I don't know what this is," which
yeah.
completely sunk me because I'm like, "How do you not know what this is?" Right?
Right.
And, this is 1999. I didn't
Yeah.
have a computer. I didn't have internet at home. We'd go into like the bookstore across the street from the hospital and
Right.
like look it up. And there was maybe a paragraph, there was
Right.
nothing.
Nothing.
So he, sent us off to a new neurologist. And, we spent about an hour with him observing and going through this visit. And he sort of just said, "Well, he has cerebral palsy." And I was like, "What?" Like, how do you know a 5-month-old has cerebral palsy? And then he said, "He'll probably never walk or talk or use his hands, but more importantly, I don't know what his cognitive functioning is going to be." And yeah, life stopped. It was, I wasn't mad because he was so honest and blunt. Like, we needed that. That was
Sure.
okay for us at the moment, but it was also complete crash.
Yeah.
What happens from here.
Yeah.
So that was the start.
Yeah,
That was the start.
good lord, it makes a very different experience to families and what they have now in some ways, and
Mm,
in some ways not, right?
right,
I was just
right,
talking with another mom last week, and she said, "My favorite doctors are the ones who say right off the bat, 'I don't know, but I'm gonna find
yes,
out.'" And it's the
yes, I
ones
say
who
that.
yeah, though it's the ones who beat around the bush or don't say things right or give the analogy of the cake that it doesn't fit well, and all I wanna do is just, like, give you a different experience that you went through, especially at that 5-month appointment, because sometimes providers say thing like, "Just go home and love your baby, nothing's changed," and you're like, "No, everything has changed.
Right, right.
Everything is different."
I mean, it's also true what they're saying, but I don't think it's what you need to hear at just that moment.
Mm,
It doesn't make sense in that moment when you're scrambling, to make sense and process any of it.
yeah,
So, of course, Benjamin was the same child I brought in, but I was not
totally.
the same person. That's
Mm,
the difference.
ooh, very true. You've changed. When you're looking back at that moment, is that kind of when you or when did you start to discover, okay, I'm going to actually be the one who's in charge of his care and making sure he gets what he needs?
So I will say that second neurologist was really a good partner. He was a much older doctor. He'd a geneticist once referred to him as like the founder of pediatric neurology. He was in it a long time and he was very compassionate. I mean, he really was. We would come in and he would say, "How are you guys doing?" before he even touched Benjamin. So,
Wow.
he was a good partner. And again, even though, this was something he knew what it was, I don't know how many of his patients had lisencephaly, but, you know, if we needed to make choices, he wouldn't say, "This is what you do." Right off
Mm,
the bat, it was, "Okay, these are some options. Think about it and tell me what you want to do." It's so right
yeah.
away, it felt like it was up to us, which was wonderful and daunting because you think you're going to the doctor and they're going to have the answers. And that just wasn't the case. And again, it sort of blows up like the severity of the issue. You're like, okay, why are they turning to me? Right.
You're like, I'm not qualified to make
Right.
this big medical decision.
1 year of college biology. I can't
Yeah,
make these choices. Right.
absolutely.
But that was the reality, right? The reality when Ben was, I think, about 7 months old, he was diagnosed with infantile spasms, which, is a really severe form of epilepsy, and I have to jump on that right away and try to control it
Yeah.
because it just destroys development otherwise. And yeah, again, it was like, okay, here are the options, ABC. Think about it. Let's jump on it. Okay, that didn't work. Here's the next thing, but he
Mm,
always would say to me, "Go home, do your research, and then let's talk," right?
yeah,
By that time, we had bought a computer and
right.
got online at home, and there was one website that actually a friend of ours had discovered for us that was a lisencephaly support group, and so it was just an email support group, like a Yahoo list, and they were families from all over the world. So they had access to all different types of medical interventions. So this became the hugest, lifeline because
Wow.
you're talking directly, to families who are living it, who can tell you, directly, this is what worked, this isn't what worked, this is the experience we had. Hey, this is what the doctor in Italy is doing, in Australia is doing. And it was fantastic.
Yeah.
So we had all of that to lean on. And
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's much easier now to sort of connect to other families worldwide if you have rare conditions or any condition really. But that, I always tell families like, that's what you want. You want to talk to people who are on the front line.
Mm,
Doctors are one thing, but they have a
mhm.
completely different perspective.
They do.
So it's so much better just to talk directly to families.
I couldn't agree more. It's one of the first pieces is like go find your community, go
Yeah.
find your network. And people are doing it in so many different ways now. It's still email lists in some ways, Facebook groups, hashtagging things that you see on social media. So it's pretty incredible. Did you find yourself outside of learning the medical steps to take is finding some validation or support in the emotional
Oh,
part?
absolutely. And I think that was the thing for me, having been a special educator first. The assumption everybody makes when they hear that I had, that background, they're like, "Oh, you were completely prepared."
Yeah.
And the first thing I felt like, the first IFSP meeting I had for Benjamin when he was, 4 months old, immediately I knew that that degree did not prepare me for the emotional side of parenting. And even though I thought I was a good teacher, I didn't get it at all.
Yeah.
So, yeah, making that connection, with other families was really important. I mean, I never assume to understand what any other family is going through, even if we have very similar circumstances,
Yeah.
but you're closer for
Yeah.
sure. You know not to make the assumption, and that's a big difference.
That's the difference. As Ben grew up and started navigating becoming, preschool and then school age and then again, then you have another son come along, right? Of just 4 years later or so. What were some of the most challenging parts to caring for a child with lisencephaly?
I always say a lot of the challenges that I had were very similar to what any parent would have. It was just really exaggerated, like sending him to preschool was like really a
Yeah.
big challenge for me. I mean, they actually he transitioned into a center-based program and he was 2. And
Okay.
I was like, how do I send a 2-year-old who doesn't speak like
Right.
to
And
school? I can't
trust.
put him on a bus, like all of that.
Oh, yeah.
you know. So but, I quickly learned again that that was another way to engage with community. It was a way
Okay.
for him to gain his own community and to find a way to exist and thrive outside of our bubble. So that was a big surprise to me. Like, oh, he has to exist outside of us. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good. And then of course I met more parents and then had real like lifelong connections to other people navigating different and similar situations. I i think with Ben the medical aspect was always a challenge.
Okay.
His the seizures were always difficult to get under control. We might have had about 2 years when he was very young where he was not having seizures, but since then, he's always had some type of seizure on a daily basis. So, we're so accustomed to it now, but, I think back to how scary it was in the beginning and not knowing like what is the right thing to do.
Finding a solution to support and ease your child's daily bowel movements and improve everyday health can feel like a challenge. 30% of children struggle with constipation, and it can feel impossible trying to find a solution for your child. Especially if your child has food allergies or has a condition or illness, you want to feel good about the products you're selecting for your child. To me, finding a company whose products have the highest quality and natural ingredients is really important. Begin Health's flagship product, Growing Up Prebiotics, is a tasteless, textureless, fine powder that easily mixes into water, juice, or smoothies. This makes it convenient for daily use without altering the flavor of your child's favorite beverages. You might ask yourself, what exactly does a prebiotic do? In the simplest of terms, the gut microbiome, aka bacteria, viruses, and fungi, are living organisms that are inside our intestines and on our skin. Begin Prebiotics feed these living organisms with the unique blend of human milk, oligosaccharides, HMOs, and fiber from chicory root inulin. Research has shown that the gut microbiome plays a significant role in the development of the immune system, digestion, and production of some vitamins and proteins. And get this, Begin Health's mission extends beyond nutrition, offering comprehensive resources for caregivers, including parent support groups and tools to create fun and engaging ways to get your kiddo to have smooth poos. To learn more about Begin Health's product, visit their website at beginhealth.com. And again, that's www.beginhealth.com. The growing little gut is the command center of early health, and here at Child Life on Call, we're helping to spread the word of investing in gut health positive routines starting at the earliest of ages. Child Life On Call podcast listeners get 25% off selected products, and you're definitely going to want to get the poop tracker game cards and stickers. Child Life specialists love a good sticker. This applies to your first subscription order and one-time orders and limited to one use per customer. beginhealth.com/childlifeoncall and use code childlifeoncall to get 25% off.
He had a lot of orthopedic issues. He had a scoliosis surgery, I think about when he was 9. He had over like a 60% degree curvature.
Yeah.
So we were not allowed to like wait on it. I think the most difficult thing for us to figure out was the feeding tube.
Yeah.
He was orally fed up until 14. So he did great, but he was eating less and less and it was taking longer and longer.
Mhm.
Still seems safe, but he was very thin and we knew he was going to have a hip surgery because his hip was dislocated. And so, the doctor said, he needs to gain weight. You might want to do it now. So
Yeah.
That was a lot of soul searching,
Sure.
and it had come up several times, but, it made the most sense at that point. We were struggling so much to get calories in.
Yeah.
So, we went ahead and did it and realized, okay, we can still feed him orally if he wants, but
Mm.
supplement. And certainly, I think it was 2 years after he got the feeding tube, we had the hip surgery, and it was so good that he had it because, we weren't thinking after that hip surgery, he couldn't sit up straight. So I
So
couldn't feed him
true.
orally because it wasn't safe.
Right.
It's like, "Oh, we have the feeding tube," but then we went down this whole other, sort of rabbit hole because he was not solely fed with formula, and I knew that, switching just to formula wasn't gonna be enough calories because he couldn't take that much fluid in a day. So
Right.
we did end up doing a combination of formula and blended diet, but it ended up being, great. It was very difficult, in the beginning. My head was exploding and I had to do a deep dive into learning how to get everything done, but
Yeah.
it ended up
Yeah.
being, a very positive thing.
Tell me a little bit about Ben's personality and some of the ways that you know him, you read him, I you were so cute in what you wrote. Like if he doesn't trust somebody, you're like, Hold on a second, like I'm gonna put my guard up," or however you put it, but it just made me laugh.
No, it's true. Yeah, Ben, I say, wins the award for being the happiest person in the house. He
Uh,
just that is his being. I open his door in the morning, he's asleep, and he smiles first, when I wake him. It's a smile first, even though like the seizure's coming next, he's always smiling first. And yes, he's the greatest judge of character. Like
yeah.
he likes most people. So if he doesn't like someone, I'm like, okay, take note. There's
Yeah.
something to know
Pay
here.
attention.
Yeah. Yeah. They have like he's just got such a good sense for people, and
Yeah.
he knows when you're, an honest and
Yeah.
genuine human being, right? Everything's so organic, right?
Right.
So that's him. I mean, he's still nonverbal, but I joke that in his lifetime, the only two phrases that he ever learned to say was, "Oh, yeah," and "I love you." And I think it perfectly describes who he is.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And he's got his brother. And so tell me a little bit about their sibling relationship and a little bit about that.
Yeah. I mean, they have a good relationship now. Ben loved Sebastian from the minute we walked in the door with him. I
I'm
mean,
sure.
I was so worried, when I was pregnant with Sebastian. I, went through that like 11th hour. Oh my God, how is this going to affect Ben's life? And how am I going
Yeah.
to take care of Ben and feed the baby? And is Ben going to cry because he doesn't like loud noises? And, then Sebastian came along, and every time Sebastian cried, Ben would laugh like, haha, joke's on you, mom. Like,
Good luck.
exactly. Good luck, mom. Deal with that,
Oh my gosh.
But, Sebastian also, when he, got older, he had a lot of sensory issues to work through. And so when Ben had problem, if he was having a seizure, if he was crying, it would completely unravel Sebastian.
Yeah.
So, Sebastian would take off and like elope. And so then we were
Mm.
dealing with whatever Ben had and a child who was on the escape, So
Yeah.
I can remember when actually I'm trying to think, there was one surgery, we brought Ben home and he was miserable, and Sebastian would like go into the garage, into the car, with headphones on, and he just had to completely be devoid of hearing that. And, we always sort of, I remember asking him, like, was it the noise or were you worried about him? And I honestly, I think the noise was an issue, but he always said, like, no, I was, worried about him. So,
Yeah.
he's always a little guarded, if something's going on with Ben, he'll always side eye us, he's always very present, checking out the situation. He's very concerned about Ben. Even away at school, he'll say, "How was Ben?" Like, "How did he get
Mhm.
up today?" Like,
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's a lot, I think, for him to digest, but they're much closer now than they had been. For sure.
Mm.
Sebastian always asked for him, tell him I love him, say goodnight,
I love
So
it. I would love to learn from you and have you explain to other parents or, healthcare professionals that are listening. When you have to bring Ben or Sebastian into a new experience, whether it's in healthcare or a new therapy or a new IEP meeting, what are some of the best questions that people ask you for you to convey? What would you envision? Like if you could walk into a new experience for the first time and what would you wanna hear somebody ask about your boys?
now I'm dividing it in my head like doctors, teachers.
Yeah,
I
and
think
we can go through each. It's kind of an impromptu question, but I myself would wanna know what's the best way to support you right now, and, like, maybe that's a question I would ask. I would wanna
that's a
know.
fantastic question. And I think with doctors too, we haven't had this experience much, but I know other families that had, right? Like sometimes doctors, you know, see a child who's very disabled and then they're just dealing with parents and never addressing the child. And you have to, address the child. Don't ghost the patient, right? Like,
Right. Mhm.
there's a lot of assumptions,
Yeah,
in healthcare and in education. We say as teachers, assume that they can do things, right? Like,
yeah.
don't limit in your mind
Mm.
what someone is capable of, right? So, address the person directly, just because they're nonverbal doesn't mean they aren't taking in the situation.
Oh
But
my gosh, we
I
need that written on every patient chart next to diagnosis. Do not set mental limitations, right, on yourself for what this child can accomplish.
yeah, and I think we've definitely seen that on both angles. I've had teachers make assumptions about Sebastian when he was, in kindergarten, a teacher, they just gave up on him. And she literally said to us in a meeting, he needs to be in a classroom where they play Cinderella music all day. And I was like,
My god.
no, no, he likes Cinderella, but,
Yeah.
he can learn.
Oh,
Can we please,
so out of touch.
just so, yeah, I think that it's important, yeah, to let go of whatever assumptions you may
Mm.
have. I'm thinking also of this. Ben, I think when he had his hip surgery, he had come out of surgery, and a nurse had approached my husband and said, "Do you want a DNR for him?" And I'm like, okay, first of all, why asking that question like after the surgery and
After.
out of the blue? And wouldn't we have like had that conversation first? And why would I want to put a DNR on a child who, was healthy but disabled?
Right, right.
you know?
Oh
So
gosh. And those
I
stick with
always
you.
sort of like know that, sometimes decisions are made based on this assumption about disability in our
Mm,
culture.
mhm.
So I think, yeah, we have to be careful about that. I personally, from day one, we, after that first experience with the neurologist, we were like, we're not doing this again. So
Yeah,
anytime we would meet a new doctor, I viewed it as me interviewing them,
yes.
not, "Oh, this you gonna take care of this patient." And if I felt that they weren't looking at my son as a whole human being, and if they weren't on the same page, and they weren't gonna partner with us, they were never going to see me again. The end. There
That's how
wasn't
it should
any
be.
need to argue about it. I'm just not coming back.
Yeah. Oh, and that takes some guts to do at the beginning because you can feel desperate to get someone's answers, and you're desperate for those protocols and treatments, but it's not gonna be a good, successful relationship if those
Yeah.
things aren't met at the beginning.
Yes. And I mean, look, we felt you know, we were lucky that we live in an area where we had choices, right? I know there are people who, if they're living in the middle of nowhere, you might not have that choice, or your insurance might really limit you. But we didn't have those, types of challenges. So
Mm.
that made it a lot easier for me.
For sure. And if you
Yeah.
are limited, there's other things to do, which is like finding another provider within the practice or finding a nurse you really
Mhm.
connect with,
Mhm.
finding that advocate, sometimes even the person at the front desk who's like, I'm gonna get
Mhm.
you in when you need to get in.
Yes.
The people around them who, you know, it you may be limited by where you can go, but try to find the people that chose that career for a reason and to help you.
Yeah, that's such a good thing. That's such good advice. Absolutely. Yeah, I think it was easy for us just because so when Ben was born, at that time, the average lifespan for a child with lisencephaly was 2 years.
Wow.
So we were like, okay, he doesn't have a whole lot of time. We're not wasting it on people that aren't going to just be
Yeah.
fabulous, you know?
Yes. Yeah.
So it was some decisions were very easy for us to make. Other things, you
Yeah.
know, were much, much harder. You know, for me, I had to, as they got older, I learned to sort of go back to something I used to do when I was a teenager, which was to write. So writing about the experience allowed me to process and then figure out, okay, all right, this is what makes sense in my life and this is how, I can go about functioning and here are the skills that, I need and the strategies that I can use in order to manage all of the conflicts that I have and know that I can't resolve. They're just not
Mm.
resolvable and that's okay. Life
Yeah.
is always in the mix of joy and grief and those things coexist, but this is how I'm going to deal with it.
That takes some discipline too at the beginning to actually sit down and write and process because it's much easier to just keep the next battle, the next battle, the next battle. The other thing you wrote that you say to parents a lot is deal with what's in front of you right now.
Right, and that was a lesson that was not easy for me to learn. When Benjamin was in early intervention, they had given me counseling. So the social worker would come over every week and yeah, every week, she'd tell me, "Joanne,
Mhm.
life is a one day at a time event."
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm a planner. I'm always looking in advance. And I was also worried about what is the future, going to hold? Is he going to live?
Yeah.
If he
Yeah.
lives, what's going to happen? And if he outlives me, how is that going to work? Right. So
Yeah.
I just I couldn't take that advice until I went through this process of writing and I wrote a book called Fall in Recovery, where I talk about how I rediscovered that the lessons that I learned in dance were
Mm,
applicable to motherhood. And so in this instance, there was a lesson that my teacher used to, go through, which was basically he would say, live in the movement. So he would, glide his hands across the air in front of him and he would say, pretend you're touching like the surface of water. And it was like, oh, okay. So that was the reminder to slow down and appreciate the moment that you're in and the movement that you're doing in this moment instead of thinking about the next one and the next one. Because if you're thinking far ahead, you can't really appreciate and give full attention to what you're doing right now. So it was a really wonderful aha moment for me to say like, "Oh, yeah, I'm a mover, right? I'm a kinesthetic
mm.
learner." So it makes complete sense to me that when I, look at things in the realm of the movement experience, that her words made complete sense,
Yeah.
and that I could, at that point, appreciate, digest, and use all of it.
Yeah. Oh, it's so beautiful. Are you still finding yourself navigating it now with a 25 and a 21-year-old living in
It's
the
so
movement?
different. It's
Mhm.
I feel like, the lows are not the same. I feel like every time a first difficult thing happens with your kids, it's a very difficult experience. And then it drags you to a very difficult point, and you're trying to find your way back up and how to navigate. I do think you sort of get used to navigating crisis. Not that it's any easier, but it will pass. You know that you have the strength to deal with it, and that makes it different. Now that I don't have to deal with the educational system, a lot of stress is relieved.
Yeah.
When they're older, you have to deal with government agencies and
Mm.
being accountable in that way. And yeah, Ben at 25, he graduated right at the COVID shutdown. So he
Wow.
lost his last, few months of school
Mm.
and all the adult day programs were shut. And they're still understaffed, and
Yeah.
there aren't a whole lot of quality medical day programs. We
Yeah.
actually tried to put him in one summer, and he lasted 8 days before he came home hurting, and they couldn't
Mm,
figure out why.
mm.
And so, then life is just, okay, well, now he's just home full time because that's where he's
Sure.
safe, right?
Yeah.
And, part of that is that's what, the mama bear in me is like, I'm going to keep him safe and we'll do life. We'll take him out and we'll do our own things with him. But in another respect, it has closed off that outside community for him.
Right.
And so that's difficult. But when you're weighing one thing against the other, it was
Yeah.
not something I lost sleep over. Sebastian, he's in this transition period now. So he stayed in the public high school until for an extra year. And then he went on to this college program. And, he's got goals that we're hoping he can meet. It's all up to him. I always say that, no one tells you that parenting is a series of learning to let go. And, like when he's got something that he has to do, like I always like instinctively get stressed for him. And then
Right.
I'm like, you gotta let that go because this is not your thing to, you know,
Oh,
like this is something he has to do.
so
He'll thrive
hard.
or he'll fail. You'll be here.
Yeah.
You can guide, but you can't do
Yeah.
things for them, right? So yeah, every once in a while I think, okay, he'll be, he's in his junior year in this program. So this year, next year, and then we'll be moving on to the now you gotta find a job. Underemployment and unemployment for children on the spectrum is very high. So
Yeah.
I'm, I'm nervous about that, but say, okay, like my mother once told me, don't borrow trouble, right? So I'm not gonna worry
So
about
true.
what's
Yeah.
happening in 2 years from now. Because
And then you'll find a whole new network and community of parents like yourself who will do for you what you've done for so many.
we all do for each other.
Mm,
That is the key. I do think that is the key.
I think so too. Well, thank you for your time. I feel like I could just sit here and talk to you for more hours and tell Ben and Sebastian, thank you for letting me borrow their mom. I'm so grateful for people like you who share so honestly about so much of it. I would love for you to share where people can find your book and if you have social media where people can follow you.
Yeah, sure. So I have a blog website, special-educationmom.com. So all the information about the book is there. The book will be available wherever books are sold. But I also do have a blog on that website. So, and a contact email. So, yeah, people are free to take a look at that and reach out.
You guys, I have the best news. If you didn't hear it at the beginning of the episode, Support Spot, our app is now available for every parent. You no longer need a hospital code to log in. So go ahead and go to childlifeoncall.com/support spot and download our app today. Hospitals and child life specialists, yes, we are still partnering with you if you want to customize content or provide this app to your families free of charge. We're so grateful that you're here. When you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week. You guys, I have the best news. If you didn't hear it at the beginning of the episode, Support Spot, our app is now available for every parent. You no longer need a hospital code to log in. So go ahead, go to childlifeoncall.com/support spot. So go ahead and go to childlifeoncall.com/support spot and download our app today. Hospitals and child life specialists, yes, we are still partnering with you if you want to customize content or provide this app to your families free of charge. We're so grateful that you're here. When you rate and review this podcast, it helps other families be able to find us. So let's keep doing that. And I will see you again here next week.